look at all the other arguments we have for God's existence and the truth of Christianity. Okay, well, if Christianity is true, what does the Bible tell us about human nature? And I'm like, man, this is making great sense of what we've already deductively concluded. So, yeah, I'm just saying it's the best explanation. Somebody wants to provide a better explanation than the existence of the soul and free will, I'd like to hear it.
All right, guys. Well, welcome to episode 13 of the Unapologetic Apologist. I'm really glad to have my first returning guest. He was here a couple months ago,
Yeah,
was it?
I think so.
Yeah,
Sounds right to me.
yeah. He. Here we go. Instead of a lower third, I've made up this little fancy thing right here. His website is freethinkingministries.com. You can follow him on Twitter at TX Express. Tim Stratton, thank you so much for being
Man,
back, sir.
man, it's great to see that picture. I love Marvel, and anytime I have a chance to dress up as one of my heroes, I got to do it. So, man, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah, that's awesome. So we are going to talk about that a little bit later. I think I've heard you say that Captain America is your favorite.
Yeah, I would say that if I had to pick a favorite, he'd be my guy. But yeah, I love Thor also, but they're all great. They're all
Well, it,
great.
it was just fun because Thor's my favorite. If I have to
Is he
pick one of
really?
the Marvel,
Wow.
yeah. So
Yeah, he's right up there at the top, but
yeah. Uh-oh. Is it something?
it's gone.
Anyway,
It's
yeah,
Thanos.
that's okay. I think one of the quotes came this. Anyway, this is off to a terrific start. Anyway, so last time you were on, we talked a lot about free will and the free
Yeah,
will argument,
it's
and
back.
yeah, we got a lot into nice. We got a lot into kind of how it's almost impossible to really be a naturalist and affirm the existence of free will, and
Almost
yet
impossible, yeah.
yeah, and yet it's it's one of those realities that you can't deny without simultaneously affirming it. Like you can believe that you don't have free will, but any attempt to argue for it is
Oh,
almost
yeah.
just demonstrating
It's
the
self-defeating to
opposite.
argue
Mhm.
for determinism. Yes, I
Yeah,
believe that's true.
yeah. So real quick before we get where we're going,
Mhm.
what would you say is the strongest argument you've heard from naturalists, or maybe even one you could come up on your own, maybe playing devil's advocate, how a naturalist could affirm the existence of free will?
Oh man, I've seen some attempts uh, appealing to quantum mechanics. I I don't think they work at the end of the day. I spent a lot of time reviewing them. Um, but that would be, I think, one's best shot. Uh, but, well, and I guess if maybe the best thing I've heard, one that I would offer, is not to explain it, try to explain it on naturalism, but just say, look, at face value, at least in a logically strict sense, there doesn't seem to be any contradiction between saying I'm a purely physical object with libertarian freedom. Um, so, yeah, I concede that. I realize that in a strict sense, at face value, there's no contradiction there. But I think the contradiction becomes uh, evident once you start to unpack what follows from naturalistic or a purely physical view of the world. So I do think it's at least probably metaphysically impossible to have libertarian freedom if you're nothing but a strictly physical or material thing.
Hmm.
Yeah, if I were, I think a lot of people try to attack premise three of the free thinking argument against naturalism, um, which is premise one of just what I call the core of the argument, which is just two premises and a conclusion. But when I expand it to the free thinking argument against naturalism, that becomes premise one of the core becomes premise three of the expanded argument. And a lot of people instinctively want to go after three. I think that's a big mistake. If I were going to attack it, if I was going to be devil's advocate trying to destroy my own argument, I think it's self-defeating to go against 3, so I would go against number 2. I would go against premise 2. So premise 2 is typically worded if, let's see, it goes like this. Premise 1 would, here, I've got it here, let me, whoops. Okay, so typically I say, in the free thinking argument against naturalism, it goes like this. 1, if naturalism is true, human nature does not include an immaterial soul. Premise 2, if human nature does not include an immaterial soul, then humans do not possess libertarian freedom. Then 3, if humans do not possess libertarian freedom, then humans do not possess the ability to rationally infer and rationally affirm knowledge claims. 4, humans do possess the ability to rationally infer and rationally affirm knowledge claims. Then we have 3 deductive conclusions. 5, therefore, humans possess libertarian freedom. 6, therefore, human nature includes an immaterial soul. 7, therefore, naturalism is false. And then I like to add an abductive conclusion at the end, just saying the best explanation for the existence of for humans possessing libertarian free will and a soul is God, and oftentimes I'll include the biblical view of God, but that's abductive, and that's really the beginning of a new argument. But those 3 deductive conclusions are the ones I like to focus on because they're deductive. So the real question is, are the first 4 premises true? And 1 is basically true by definition. You're not going to get too many people arguing against that. 4, to deny that is to affirm it. And so you're really left between 2 and 3. And most people go after 3, I think, to their demise. In fact, there's many atheists who affirm 3. Well-known atheist philosophers who are going to say, no, Tim is right, 3 is true. So if there's anything we're going to attack here, it's got to be 2. So if I were an atheist, I'm coaching my enemies here. If you're listening to this, you got to go after 2, man. That's really where the debate is going to take place. And usually that's where the most interesting debates take place, in my opinion. But I know many atheists and naturalists who affirm the core of the free thinking argument. So that's the free thinking argument against naturalism. That would be premise 3, premise 4, and deductive conclusion 5. So if I just take that out, that's premise 1, premise 2, and premise 3 of what I simply call the free thinking argument. And then I've got the free thinking argument against naturalism, which is all 7 or 8 steps if I include the abductive. So did I answer your question? I kind of went off there a bit.
Yeah, you did. Something that occurred to me while you're talking is I remember last time we were kind of talking about how some atheists will say free will is just an emergent property, and we kind of were like, yeah, no, that doesn't really work because how exactly could it just emerge? All
Right.
that's really saying is things get so complex we can't predict it. But something did just occur to me, which is that some of the people working like kind of in the AI development start talking about how computers can start learning for themselves. Like to a point, you put so much information in them, and they can really only put out what's put into them. But they'll start saying, well, but computers do start learning for themselves. They, like, for example, if you give them the rules on how to play chess,
Right.
but you don't tell them how to win chess, well, now they have to learn for themselves and start figuring out, okay, what's the best way to win chess. And so if somebody's arguing that the human brain, if there's no soul, there's just the human brain would be like the most complex computer we ever have. Could they argue that there's maybe a parallel there where how computers start learning for themselves, maybe the brain starts somehow learning for itself and free will can emerge that way?
Well, the main question here is, I mean, sure, even animals learn. I don't think my dog has free will, but he learns,
Mm,
right? He's learned what he has to do to get food,
right.
or what he has to do to be let outside and things like that. Um, he knows if he gets into the trash. I mean, when I walk into the house, if he's down with his ears down, just walking around, I'm like, oh, I'm gonna go into the kitchen and the trash is gonna be knocked over. Um, I just, yeah. So I've learned from him, but uh, he's learned in that sense. But the bottom line is, if a computer is a fully material thing, then it's completely determined. If there's no part about it that is not made of nature or the things that science can test and discover, then it stands to reason that it does not possess freedom. Uh, so, so you're asking, yeah. So remind me, what's the question again?
Well, so like if you give a computer the rules to play
Oh,
chess,
yeah. Can it? Okay, so I would just say,
but you don't
can it
tell it how to
choose?
win,
Right.
it
So,
has to figure out on
yeah,
its own how to win.
yeah, but it's still functioning according to its programming,
Yes.
right? And so, in reality, it does not make a choice. It does not have, the computer never has a range of options, a range of alternative options, which are both compatible with its nature at the moment. Now,
Hmm.
if somebody wants to argue that, I'd love to hear the argument that computers do have that ability. Um, but all the computer scientists that I've talked, I'm not a computer scientist, but
Right.
yeah, but I've talked to many of them, and in fact, I've got an article coming out explaining the difference between computers and humans soon. I haven't published it yet, but I've got it finished. But yeah, I wrote it a long time ago. I need to refresh my memory on what I wrote. But yeah, I just it stands
Well,
to, yeah. Go ahead.
sorry. No, because it's a side thought, so I want to let you finish yours first.
Oh, well, yeah. Most people are going to say, yeah, well, a computer can learn, but it doesn't have free will.
Okay.
And so you have to ask, what do we mean by learning? And
Well,
um,
that was gonna be my next question.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I would say also, um, doesn't seem to me, and I mean, even atheist philosophers like Alex Rosenberg are going to say, well, computers don't really think of and about things.
Right.
They can trick ignorant humans because they look like they are, but they don't have intentional states of consciousness. They just are functioning according to rules in which they've been programmed. Um, so if you don't think of and about things, do you really learn about things? Um, I think it really just uh, complex programming can trick ignorant humans.
So
I've had
so
one
could we
computer.
say learning is like the addition of information, but you're not like choosing to between an array of options on which information to acquire?
There's never, I don't think there's ever a choice. So the question is there ever a, does a human ever have an ability to choose their beliefs? And this gets us into a complete new discussion called doxastic voluntarism, namely indirect doxastic voluntarism. And I don't think most computer scientists would say that computers fall under that category.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was kind of playing
But
devil's advocate against my own beliefs there because I had a big argument with a friend of mine, and he is a computer scientist, but he
mm,
kind of has this worry that some people do, like maybe computers, like Skynet will kind of happen one day, and I kept
right.
arguing that at the end of the day, the computers can really like Ultron, right? In the
Yeah.
Age of Ultron,
Right.
I don't see that happening. Like a computer can't question its own program. Now, like
Right.
if you tell a computer, okay, solve the problem of human suffering, but and you don't give it any rules like, well, you can't kill humans, well then maybe it will decide it can kill humans. It'll just kill everybody, and then
Hmm.
that's suffering. But if you put in the rule, okay, you can't get there by killing people, I don't see how the computer is ever going to question that rule and say, well,
Right.
should
Right.
I really follow that rule?
Did God really say? Like we see in Genesis.
Yeah.
um, yeah. But bottom line, what I want to focus on is the core of the free thinking argument.
Yeah, I
So,
apologize that I was going off on a
yeah.
lot of.
No, I mean, so I would just say the core is, if humans do not possess libertarian freedom, then humans do not possess the ability to rationally infer and rationally affirm knowledge claims. Now, you could say, if computers do not possess libertarian freedom, then computers do not possess the ability to rationally infer and rationally affirm knowledge claims. Then you could say humans or computers, if one wanted to argue that way, do possess the ability to rationally infer and rationally affirm knowledge claims. And then it would follow, therefore, humans and computers, if you wanted to make that argument, possess libertarian freedom. So I think there's reasons to doubt the computer. But if one wants to say, no, computers really do possess the ability to rationally infer and rationally affirm knowledge claims, and that not everything about it is determined by things other than it, then one could try to make a case that a computer has libertarian freedom. But I think that the counter arguments against that would, it would show that there's something different about humans and computers, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and I agree. I think one of the fallacies people typically make when thinking a computer can eventually reach some kind of level like in Skynet or Ultron, they're committing a fallacy by saying, well, look, here's a human brain, and we know the human brain has freedom and can make choices and can do things, so why couldn't a computer eventually get that complex? And they're making the fallacy of not realizing that there's a soul involved with the person. It's not just the human brain, and that's our whole argument here, is that there's not just a human brain, there's a soul that's at work, and you can't ever put that into a computer.
Well, maybe God could.
Well, God could. And you could argue that there's a soul, like if there's somebody constantly feeding new information into the computer, then that person would be kind of the soul behind it. But if you just leave computers to their own.
Yeah. So the question is, when people say, well, computers or calculators are rational, like, no, they emulate the rationality of the programmer. So the question is, we're back to the original question, is the programmer a rational being who has the ability to deliberate and weigh and judge and evaluate, and those things aren't determined by something else. So it seems to me, going back to the expanded argument, that a fully physical thing, something that's completely material or natural, and by natural I mean stuff science studies, something is completely physical, natural, or material, it will be determined by the laws of nature, namely physics and chemistry, and the past events of nature. So even if one wants to say, well, some quantum states aren't determined by the initial conditions of the Big Bang or whatever. Well, okay, fine, but still, humans aren't in control of quantum states. So we're talking about the thinking things. If there's something about me that is not determined by the laws or events of nature, then what is that, and how is that? And so it seems to me that an immaterial soul or mind, whatever you want to call it, if they don't like the word soul, fine, just say an immaterial aspect of my existence. By immaterial, I mean something that is not determined by the laws of nature, that's not determined by physics and chemistry. So if I really want to be a free thinker, then physics and chemistry can't be ultimately responsible for the thoughts and beliefs in my brain. Even if we feel like we're learning and choosing, that would be an illusion. So can we trust what we're learning all the time if something other than me is causally determining all the thoughts and beliefs in my skull all the time? That's not to say I can't ever have true beliefs, or any correct thought processes, but to say that it's always causally determining all of my thoughts and beliefs all the time is going to lead us to the conclusion that I can't, even if I'm right, I could never know if I was right.
Well, that's funny you say that, because I was telling somebody that, like, if you really don't have free will, then you can accidentally just have the belief I don't have free will, and you're correct about that.
But you would never know it.
You wouldn't know it. And the funny thing is people are typically reasoning from a point of naturalism, right? So a worldview where there is no God. And so the implications of there is no God means it's just the natural world, means we don't have free will. But hypothetically, there could be a God who just created creatures who don't have free will. And then so if you happen to have the belief I don't have free will,
Calvinists think.
Yeah, you're correct, but at the same time, then your backwards reasoning is wrong, and you don't have like grounds to be an atheist at least, because maybe God just
Right.
created creatures that don't have free will.
Yeah. So I make this case against the naturalistic determinists and the theistic determinists, or who I call the exhaustive divine determinists, Ed for sure. But
You silly
um,
Calvinists.
I've got an article. What's it called? Killing two birds with one stone, I think is what it's called.
Okay.
And I interact with both versions. I mean, they both have the exact same problems, but for different reasons.
Yeah.
Um, so,
So I want to ask one more question that'll kind of be a sidetrack issue, and then I want to focus back in on this. Um, but because we use the term libertarian free will, and so to me that means we're using that term deliberately, not just using the term free will. Like we could just say free will. And so I wanted to ask you what a distinction is there, because I was listening to a panel with a couple of atheists, and one of the questions was like, well, do you believe we have free will? And the atheist on the panel is like, well, I don't believe we have libertarian free will,
right.
as in, well, we do have some free will, but it's not libertarian free will. And
Yeah.
I wish I could have pressed him, well, what free will do you think we have? Because he never expounded on it.
Yeah. Well, he's probably talking about compatibilism. I was just talking to a well-known atheist in Washington, D.C. last week. I led a apologetics slash uh, mission trip to the DC area with a bunch of teenagers. Where Free Thinking Ministries is working with Maven, which is Brett Kunkel's ministry, and you need to have him on your show sometime and talk about what he's doing with Maven. It's just fantastic. But I love working together with him. But we pay atheists to come talk to the students that we've been training, and then let them have a respectful and a loving, fun Q&A with them. It's just fantastic. And one of the atheists we brought in was really thoughtful and very nice. Really enjoy the guy. But I started talking to him afterwards, because during the Q&A, the adults aren't allowed to talk. It's just the students. And so afterwards, after all the students left, he and I started talking, and he said, well, no, I don't think libertarian free will exists. If I'm going to be an atheist and a naturalist, I've got to say that doesn't exist, but I'm a compatibilist. So there you go. And so compatibilistic free will and libertarian free will are two different things. I think we have good reason to reject compatibilism. Compatibilism is still determinism, or that is to say, if compatibilism explains reality, the way things are, then determinism is still true. A lot of times people say, well, compatibilism is just the thesis that free will slash or responsibility is compatible with determinism. And I say, okay, well, I don't want to talk about a thesis.
Right.
I want to talk about reality. So if you're a compatibilist and you say that compatibilism describes reality, then what you are saying is determinism is true. Great. Let's roll with that, and I'll tell you why determinism doesn't work. But compatibilistic freedom. Yeah, I mean, here let me open this up. I've got it in this paper I wrote here. Yeah, so Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy defines compatibilism this way. I'll read it. Quote, compatibilism is the thesis that free will is compatible with determinism. Some people would say that it's not free will we're talking about, but responsibility. But I'll just stick with this. Compatibilism is the thesis that free will is compatibilism with determinism. It goes on, but that's really the sense. But it says because free will is typically taken to be a necessary condition of moral responsibility, compatibilism is sometimes expressed as a thesis about the compatibility between moral responsibility and determinism. So that's just what I already pointed out. But that definition stands in contrast to the position that I affirm of libertarian freedom. And libertarian freedom has several different ways to define it. Some people will say, well, libertarian freedom is merely the ability to do otherwise, or as I like to say, mainly what I like to think about is the ability to think otherwise. Do I ever have the ability to think otherwise? If I don't, say goodbye to rationality, or to rational affirmation of those thoughts or any beliefs that occur from those thoughts. So yeah, but some would say it's all about an ability to think or act otherwise. But others have pointed out, no, maybe we don't need that principle of alternative possibilities, or what's often called the PAP, the PAP. We just simply need to be undetermined. As long as you think or act in such a way that it's not causally determined by anything other than you, the thing you call I. If you're not causally determined by anything, not to be confused with influence, but if you're not causally determined by anything, then you are free in a libertarian sense, even if for some weird reason you can't do or think otherwise. Now, I do like to argue for both. I'd say, though, that the ability to do or think otherwise is not, it's not just having that. Well, I'll say this. That is sufficient. If you could prove that you have the ability to do or think otherwise, then you've got libertarian freedom. But what's necessary is to be uncaused. You can't be causally determined. So that doesn't mean I'm never causally determined. But if there's ever an instance where I'm not causally determined to think or act, and that's really up to me, the thing that Tim Stratton calls I, if that's up to me and not causally determined by nature or the events of nature or anything other than me, then I'm free in a libertarian sense and truly responsible. And I've got a recent article I wrote on Free Thinking Ministries called "The Failure of Frankfurt?" I would also encourage people to go spend some time with that article too. I try to have a little bit of fun with some thought experiments, but I think some things are clarified and illuminated in that thing. So, but yeah, I could. Do you have any more questions about compatibilism? Compatibilist states.
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
it just dawned on me. Merely saying that free will is compatible with determinism doesn't actually explain how we got free will. It doesn't explain how free will is introduced into the system.
Yeah, but that's a different question.
Okay.
I think basically what you get with compatibilism is you get, well, depends who you're talking to. But there's a difference between consciousness and the ability to think otherwise. So there's two different things we've got to think about here. Some atheists and naturalists are going to say, well, consciousness is an illusion, like Alex Rosenberg. But
except his consciousness.
Right. His book is really good, by the way. It's called The Atheist's Guide to Reality.
Okay.
I think he does a great job of painting a picture of what would be the case if atheism/naturalism is true. And it's just when you reach absurd conclusions, you have good reason to doubt the premises, right? Even if you don't know what's wrong with it, you have really good reason to say, no. So I've actually encouraged people read his book and see if atheism rings true at the end of it. But yeah, I've used it to help strengthen the faith of theists before, or to challenge the faith of atheists. Anyway, the theistic Christian Calvinist might say, okay, well, yeah, you've got intentional states of consciousness. You're thinking of and about things, which is hard to explain for the naturalist, not for the Calvinist. But you don't have any freedom over what you're going to think of and about, or how you're going to think of and about it. So I say you're just a mere bag of beliefs, none of which are up to the bag. Those thoughts and beliefs are put in by the grocery store. The cashier, you're buying your groceries, and he's putting. Well, that's a different thing. Yeah, right. A lot of Calvinists will say, well, God's got libertarian freedom. Some will say he doesn't. But yeah, that'll get us down another rabbit trail. So anyway, compatibilism depends on the compatibilist you're talking to, but you always have to find out exactly what they're talking about. Are you just talking about the thesis, or are you talking about reality of how things actually are? Or are you, and then are you an Edwardsian compatibilist who says, well, you only make choices based on your greatest desires, which are determined by your nature, which is determined by something other than you. Now, atheists will say that was determined by physics and chemistry. The Calvinists will say that's determined by God. Your nature is determined by God. But hey, you're still free to choose however you want to choose. I mean, so if you're choosing based on your greatest wants and desires, then hey, you've still got freedom. We'll call it. Yeah, but something other than me programmed me to want that. And if I always choose based on my wants and never have the ability to choose against it, which Paul seems to refute, but if that's the case, then who's really responsible for my choices? It's not really.
Yeah.
They're not really my choices. So anyway, I've written a lot about this on my website. My dissertation is chock full of talking about compatibilism. So when that comes out, I'll make sure you get a
Yeah.
copy.
Absolutely. Soon
And
enough, I'll be introducing you as Dr. Tim Stratton.
yeah, hopefully it's not too far away.
Yeah.
I just finished my entire dissertation rough draft. So I
Awesome.
got all 8 chapters done. It's long. Um,
How long is each chapter?
it depends. I mean, I've got some chapters that are close to probably 50 pages, and
What's the limit
others.
of how much you have to write overall for it?
Uh, I don't. I thought it was 100,000 words minimum, but then I found out later that there wasn't an official minimum, but that was more of a recommendation.
Okay.
But I'm well past that. Uh, I'm probably around, I don't know, could be close to 150,000 words, but uh, it's going to be, um, it'll go to the committee soon. They'll have 2 months to read it, and then I'll be defending it. So,
Nice.
well, it's not quite ready to go to the committee. Got some more fine tuning to do with it, but I'm done with the rough draft of it. So, I'm
Awesome.
excited about that. Yeah.
So I keep getting more questions, but I'm gonna ignore it for now because I want to get where we're going. So to the abductive part. So
Yeah.
somebody might say, okay, fine, naturalism isn't true, but why do you need God to explain libertarian freedom? Why do you need God to explain the mind? Couldn't it just be some kind of Platonic abstract objects out there that aren't
Yeah.
material? But so how does this lead us to God?
Well, my final conclusion is abductive. It's not deductive. And so I'm saying, what's the best explanation of not just libertarian freedom, but I mean, the expanded argument against naturalism shows that we have good reason to think we have an immaterial aspect of our existence. Sure, I think there's people could come up with some ad hoc explanations. And I'm just saying, what's the best explanation of all this data? And then when I read the biblical data, it seems to affirm what I've already reached deductively, independently. So I'm saying, look here what it says in the Old
Yeah.
Testament. It talks about how God says he wants to create man and woman in his image. Well, right away we're like, okay, men and women have different images, right? uh, and and the humans of all, I mean, we're all different sizes and shapes and colors and everything else. So what is it?
And God's not material.
Well, that's where I'm going next, because then, I mean, uh, even, I mean, the Kalam cosmological argument alone, not to mention uh, Leibniz's contingency argument, and I think you could use the ontological argument. I mean, we've got several different arguments that are all going to point to God as an immaterial thing, and even an immaterial thinking thing, an immaterial mind with free will. Actually, the Kalam cosmological argument, although it says nothing about God in the premises or the conclusion, the rational inferences that follow from the conclusion. One is um, that the cause of the universe, whatever it is, has to have libertarian freedom. Well, persons are the only things that have libertarian freedom. If somebody wants to say, no, I guarantee C3PO has uh, has libertarian freedom, then I'd say, okay, I think C3PO then would start to qualify as a person, not a human, but a person. I think that libertarian freedom is a quality that's only possessed by persons. And definitely, if sticking with Star Wars, we would say that Chewbacca and Yoda are persons. It seems to me, even if they're not humans. So, if the cause of the universe is an immaterial thinking thing with free will, and humans are created in His image, as Genesis 1 tells us, first chapter of the Bible. Then it stands to reason, okay, what is God? If God doesn't have a body because He's the creator of all matter, and bodies are made of matter, then it stands to reason that if I am in the image of God, and so is my wife, and so is my son, and so are you, and so is LeBron James, who's definitely way bigger and stronger than me, right? But we're equal in the image of God. What is it? What is it about all humans that gives us equal rights? Well, I'd say it's because we're all created equal in the image of God. And that image of God, as the Kalam shows us, is an immaterial thinking thing with free will. So there you go. Genesis 1 starts to support that. Then I would say Paul in the New Testament, kind of validates that and continues in that thought process. He makes claims like to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. Okay, well, if that's true, then that makes great sense of the data that we've already reached in the free thinking argument, that there is something about me that's still me apart from my body. I can be absent from my body. Well, if I can be absent from my body, then what is that? Well, it seems to be an immaterial thinking thing, the thing that Paul would call I. So there's if Paul can be absent from his body, then based on the law of identity, Paul is not his body.
Yeah.
He has a body. And so I just think you start going through the biblical data. I'm not making a deductive argument here. I'm simply saying,
Right.
look, here's 3 deductive conclusions, and now I'm going to follow those deductive conclusions by saying, what's the best explanation of this? Well, look at all the other arguments we have for God's existence and the truth of Christianity. Okay, well, if Christianity is true, what does the Bible tell us about human nature? And I'm like, man, this is making great sense of what we've already deductively concluded. So, yeah, I'm just saying it's the best explanation. Somebody wants to provide a better explanation than the existence of the soul and free will, I'd like to hear it. And then let's weigh it. Let's is that really the best explanation? Maybe there's other explanations. I don't think it's the best, but that's a different conversation. I am willing. Oftentimes, I don't share the final abductive conclusion. I mean, I just say, hey, this really starts a new conversation right here with the abductive. And it seems to me it's the best explanation. So, I don't want to come off too hard with that. I'm just saying, hey, it's not deductive. It does not follow logically from the premises. I'm just trying to make the best sense of all the data.
Yeah.
Does that make
No,
sense?
yeah, absolutely. That's
Cool.
great. So I guess kind of a side question, because I want to ask Frank Turek this, because there's an implication from his answer, but I don't know if you'll have the same answer as he does. So do you believe we have free will in heaven? Because the
Yes.
idea is that,
Yep.
okay, but so we don't sin
Right.
in heaven, but we'll have
But you
free will to
can.
sin. We
Yep.
can, but
But you won't.
so why? That's what I want to
You'll be
ask.
too smart for that. You'll be too smart for that. In fact, next week I have an article coming out. Let me see what I've called. I think it's called A Thought Experiment versus Unjustified Evil and Suffering. I could get into it here, but I kind of don't want to.
You don't have to.
Yeah.
So the only reason I wanted to ask is because I know, because when people ask me that, and I typically give a similar answer to Frank Turk, which is yes, we'll have free will, but we won't have any need to sin. We'll see God for who He is, and
Yeah.
all of the reasons
I
like we
see
sin
that.
on there's we have a lot of reasons we sin on earth because of temptation and lacking things that we want and selfish desires, but we won't have that. That won't be a thing in heaven.
I'll just say this. I see that that explanation. I think we can offer a stronger one. And if I were playing devil's advocate, I'd counter and say, well, look, Uh, Satan. Why didn't he see it that way?
That's where I was going with it.
A
Yeah.
third of all the angels. What was up with that? Adam and Eve. I mean, walking with God. With I mean, and what's up with the why did they have a nature that would sin? What did God create Adam and Eve with a nature that that will sin? What about Satan and a third of the angels? I mean, were they responsible for that, or was it
You beat
God?
me to it because that's
Yeah,
exactly the question I was going to
yeah,
ask Frank as well. What about Satan? So
yeah.
how
So
do
I
you
don't,
answer
I
that?
don't. Yeah, I say, look, um, I would say that we are blessed because you and I are in a situation, in a state of affairs that uh, Adam, Eve, Satan, and a third of all the angels uh, didn't have suffering.
Mm,
Uh, and Paul says in 2 Corinthians 4:17 that these light momentary afflictions, and Paul knew what it was like to suffer. In fact, he wrote out a whole list of all of his sufferings, right? And that was before he was killed. So Paul knew what it was like to suffer, but Paul said these light momentary afflictions prepare us for an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison. So you really start thinking about that, like, what is it about these afflictions that are preparing us? And basically, I mean, in my article, I'm not going to give it all away right now, but it's we learn. Uh, we have the ability to learn how stupid it is not to listen to God, not to
yeah.
follow the law of Christ. And, ultimately, I say God gives us the freedom to choose to learn from suffering or not. To choose, I mean, are we going to continue resisting God's teachings, or are we going to allow Him to teach us? Um, I don't think the computer, by the way, can make that decision.
Right.
Uh, so, um, an ability to choose to learn or not to learn, which would be libertarian freedom. Either it's programmed to learn or it's not. But I think we have choices to make. Are we going to uh, allow ourselves to learn from suffering or not? And those who do learn and who learn how stupid it is not to follow the commands of Jesus, who learn how stupid it is not to approximate to the purpose of life, which is love, right? To love all persons all the time, from each person of the Trinity to every person the Trinity ever created, including those who consider you to be an enemy. It's love, love, love. Those who learn to love all people all the time, uh, from God to everybody else, will spend eternity together loving each other. And those who aren't willing to learn, well, that's cool. God says, I give you ultimate freedom.
Yeah.
Go do life your own way with a whole bunch of people who have not learned how to love. Um, God just,
Yeah.
he gives freedom to everybody.
Absolutely.
So anyway, I don't know when you're going to release this video or this
Probably
our
today.
interview here. Okay. Well, then I would just say next week I'll have an article out called "A Thought Experiment versus Unjustified Evil and Suffering," and I think I'll answer your question there. But I've also got a short little video on my website. I think it's just called "Free Will in Heaven," um, where I'm interviewed at the EPS conference in Denver last year. It was a spur of the moment thing. So go to my website. You might want to include that on the link to it in any show notes you have or whatever. But bottom line, unlike Satan and a third of all the angels and Adam and Eve, we'll be in a suffering-free state of affairs eventually. We won't take it for granted. Why?
Yeah.
Because you've suffered. I'll tell you this. I'm in my mid-40s now, and I still try to stay in great shape. But it's getting harder and harder to do because my knees hurt so badly. I've just worked them really hard over the years, from basketball to martial arts to wrestling to CrossFit, and they're really starting to hurt right now. They hurt all the time. Well, almost all the time. So I'm always thinking about how they hurt. Even when I'm sitting down, they're hurting me. I'm still active. I'll still go out and run and things like that. But just every step is pain. But every once in a while, I'll wake up, I'll go down the stairs, and I'm like, "Huh, my knees didn't hurt." And I'll go back up the stairs. I'm like, no, they're not hurting right now. And I'm like, now something that I used to take for granted, I no longer take for granted. When it doesn't hurt me to walk up the stairs, I'm like, oh, this is awesome.
Mm-hmm.
So I've actually learned not to take pain-free knees for granted. Now, I think Satan and Adam and Eve, third of all the angels, took a suffering-free state of affairs for granted, and they wrecked it. But you and I won't, because we've suffered. We know how bad it is. We've experienced moral evils that lead to suffering. Even if we weren't alive to see it in person, I mean, we're definitely aware of things like the Holocaust, and we saw 9/11, and we see horrible things all the time, and sometimes it happens to us, moral evil that happens to us. So we've experienced moral evil. We experience natural evil. We get tornadoes here in my neck of the woods quite often. Other people on the coast get hurricanes and earthquakes and tsunamis, horrible stuff. Forest fires, the list goes on and on. That's naturally, but we know we won't take when we get to heaven or the new heavens and new earth, and we're not affected by those things anymore. We're not going to take that for granted. Even gratuitous evil, what would typically be called gratuitous evil, we're still aware of it. And so if somebody says, well, what about gratuitous evil? I say, well, would you prefer to live in a world where gratuitous evil does exist or where it doesn't exist? And if you awoke tomorrow in a state of affairs in which you knew that what you consider to be gratuitous evil no longer existed, would you take that for granted, or would you say, yes, this is how it ought to be? Well, if you say, yes, this is how it ought to be, then I say, well, great. And if you feel that way about all evil, moral, natural, and what you claim to be gratuitous, then I say, well, great. You've learned from these afflictions, and they're prepared you for an eternal weight of glory. You're ready for heaven. So anyway, I'll get into this.
And then it by definition wasn't gratuitous.
That's exactly right.
But yeah.
Yeah. That's why in the article's title, it's got the word gratuitous or unjustified, means the same thing, and quotes. Yeah. I just encourage you and everybody watching this, check out what you think.
Absolutely. So, real quick, this is kind of taking a hard left turn. I only wanted to talk about the abortion issue because last time we had talked about it, and the last time that New York bill had just got released, and so would legalize abortion all the way up to 9 months, and of course it was under the guise of, well, if there's an emergency for the woman, and then of course it turned out that's not really the case, and of course we've known all along that Colorado would do abortions up to 9 months, no questions asked. It doesn't matter if your health, but all that aside, so Roe v. Wade had just become the norm, and yeah, there was a debate between pro-lifers and pro-choicers, but that was just kind of the norm. It's just abortion was legal in different states, and then New York passed that bill, and we talked about it, and I kind of just had thought, oh, Mom, it was inevitable. This is the direction our country was going to go in eventually, and it sucks. And what I didn't anticipate was then Alabama and Georgia. I got all these states listed here. They started passing heartbeat bills, and some of them were even just outright abortion bans. I started thinking, oh, okay. And then
I gotta say, what's that?
Yeah.
Well, I was just gonna say, as a Nebraska Cornhusker fan, it's really hard for me not to say "Roll Tide." I'm like, Alabama rocks. I mean, come on. Love Alabama.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So.
So.
But anyway, so. Well, so first I want to just real quick dispel some of the myths going around. So one of the myths is, because of course this is just what happens. The left mainstream media peddles these myths, and then it assumes, well, the media said it, so of course it must be true, and people don't go read the bills for themselves. So one of the things is that it criminalizes women who get abortions. That's not the case. They only
Right.
criminalize the third party performing the abortions. And of
Mm-hmm.
course, the doctors know exactly what they're doing. The mainstream pro life position is that women are almost as much of a victim as the baby
Right.
is, because they're lied to and
Yeah.
they're tricked
Yes.
into thinking, oh, this is just a clump of cells that we're
Mm-hmm.
getting rid of.
Right. Right.
One of the other myths is that it criminalizes women for going out of state. It doesn't. One of the other myths, I actually have it listed here, if I can find it. Right, is that even if a woman has a serious health risk, that she's still forced to carry the baby to term. That's not true. Even in the Alabama, even in the states that
Mm-hmm.
completely outright ban it, still allow for an exception for the mother if her life is at risk to get an abortion.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the bills even go as far to say if she's raped and the depression of that is going to cause her to commit suicide, there's even an exception in that case. So
I didn't know that.
I can't remember which one that was, but I remember listening to, I think it was Michael Knowles, and he was talking about it.
Yeah.
Um, but anyway, and then of course there are other states like Maine and Vermont who are following in New York's direction of legislation. So I'm gonna ask you, like, what do you think is like the future of our country here? Because we're becoming more polarized, and not
Mm-hmm.
that as a general rule I'm for polarization, right? I think it's best if people can come together and find common ground.
Yeah.
But when it comes to a case like this,
Unless it's
I'm absolutely
common ground and evil. Yeah.
well, I was going to say I'm absolutely for
Right.
polarization if it's in pursuit of truth. If it's in
Yeah.
pursuit of truth, and there's nothing immoral about polarization. And yes, I absolutely want
Right.
to be polarized from somebody who thinks abortion up till 9 months, taxpayer funded, is perfectly fine.
Right. Yeah. So what's your question? Am I for this polarization?
Well,
Or
I already.
what? Yeah. I
Well, I was
yeah.
just gonna say,
We
like,
ought to be look, if Hitler was calling the shots right now, we ought to be polarized against Hitler,
absolutely.
right? We ought to be polarized against the Holocaust. So, yeah, if we said, well, we're all unified, isn't that great? We all agree that Hitler is awesome, and we all agree that what he's doing with the Holocaust, that's great. But hey, unity, love, I mean, flourishing.
Like, well,
No, that's evil.
let's
Yeah, we've
find
got to
common
be
ground. Maybe he
opposed.
can only kill
No,
3 million Jews.
right, right. Yeah, we ought to be opposed to evil. We ought to be polarized against it. And so, yeah, I agree with you. It's a good thing to be polarized against. And it's, there's some things that you got, some hills you got to be willing to die on. And I think this is a hill worth dying on right here. And I'll
Yeah.
tell you this: do I think that? I mean, you asked me the direction we're going. I was actually thinking about this morning. I woke up early and went for a run. Not terribly far, but during my run, I was thinking about this. I don't think this world will ever be free from the debate against abortion. So let's just say it's legalized everywhere. There will always be a resistance against it.
Mhm.
Why? Because we know it's killing a human being. And I mean, obviously, most Christians are going to be against it. All Christians should be against it.
Yeah.
But most Christians, at least evangelical Christians, are going to be against it. And even not, let's say most Christians are going to be against it because it seems to flow logically from reading the Bible. But when you've got atheists like Christopher Hitchens making secular cases against it, and as the science improves and we know more and more about the preborn, it just becomes crystal clear that you're killing a
Yeah.
human. And so as long as the world believes it's wrong to kill a human, there will always be a resistance to Planned Parenthood and the abortion industry, as well it should. We know it's wrong. The vast majority, I mean, even when, I just say it's written in our hearts. We know that's a human, right?
Yeah.
And you don't kill humans. You don't kill innocent humans for your convenience. That is
Yeah.
wrong. It's evil. We just know it. So yeah, you asked me where do I think it's going. I'll tell you this: I sure didn't see states like Alabama and Georgia go in this direction. I thought, man, I didn't think I'd ever see any states doing that. That's why when Alabama came out, that's why I started yelling "Roll Tide," because I just could not believe what I was saying. So yeah, I used to be like, just think, man, we're just going down the drain. It's inevitable. Pray for Jesus to come back tomorrow. Well, no, I don't think we need to. Jesus might come back a million years from now. Every generation has thought it's the end times. I'm sorry, I'm not going to make that assumption. Um, I hope it's tomorrow. I'm not going to assume it. So right. I think we need to do everything in our power to try to change the laws and try to change minds.
Yeah.
So let's just say the laws never change. Well, then we ought to work to change everybody's mind on it. So, hey, it's legal to get an abortion, but nobody does it.
Yeah. That'd be nice.
They all know it's wrong. Well, okay, that's great. But I say it's all right to have both. Change people's minds and make it illegal. Ban it across the board because just like we ban murder, it's illegal to murder somebody. Does that mean you're going to stop it? All of it? No, but you're sure going to slow it down. I mean, if it wasn't illegal to murder people, we'd have more murders.
Right.
There's no consequences.
Yeah.
Oh man, we'd see murders all over the place, right next to you every day. I don't know, but it's illegal. It slows it down, doesn't end it. People are like, oh, it's still going to happen in the back alleys. It's going to slow it down. It's going to slow down murders. Most people are not going to do it. Some will still, just like some people continue to murder people, but it slows it down. It's the right thing to do. It should be illegal to murder people.
Yeah, and of course there's a large percentage of women who, for example, who go into like crisis pregnancy centers thinking they want the abortion, and then as soon as they see the ultrasound, they change their minds.
Right.
And there's a lot of women who have gotten abortions who say, if I had known, I would never have done it. So it's not just like we're going to make it illegal and then the same exact amount of people are just now going to be going in back alleys. That's not how it works.
Right. I agree.
Of course, this gets into like the whole. There's a cultural problem too, which is, we're teaching people that it's okay to just treat sex, however, like you can have sex with whoever you want as much as you want, and that there's no consequences. And I've always said, like, regardless of what you believe, whether you think God created us or evolution brought us here, either way, reality is such a way that sex makes babies, and so like you're responsible for what you do with your body. Stay out of my bedroom. Fine, I'll stay out of your bedroom. But guess what? You can't kill babies as a consequence of poor choices you've made, whether you didn't use contraception or look, hey, maybe you did use contraception. Maybe you did everything right. But guess what? You still rolled the dice, and now that's still a baby, and you have no right to kill that baby.
Yeah.
And, Matt Walsh made a great point about people say this is about reproductive rights. He's like, no, because we're talking about a baby that's already been reproduced.
Reproduction has already happened. Yeah, that's right. That's a great point.
Yeah.
I like that guy. He's a good thinker most of the time. I've disagreed with some of his, some of the things he said, but 90% of the time, I'm like, yeah, he's a good thinker.
Yeah, I'd like to talk to him about some of the religious stuff.
Yeah.
I thought maybe we'll do that next time. So real quick, because we are running out of time, I did want to talk about Marvel a little bit. So we got into our favorite heroes. So maybe before we get into some of the philosophical implications of the last couple movies, I want to ask your opinion. So Infinity War was one of my favorite movies of all time. I've watched it so many times. I always figure out something different about it.
Yeah, me too.
And
I don't know how many times I've watched it now. Yeah.
Yeah, especially like since I took a screenwriting class, I appreciate movies more,
really?
and I start figuring out like what was some of the stuff they did. And I have an unpopular opinion here. I think I was not a huge fan of Endgame, and maybe it's just because of all the hype that was built up behind it that it just couldn't kind of meet the standards. And maybe we can get into why I wasn't a huge fan of it. But what's your thought on it?
I loved it. A lot of it was because really it's one big movie, Infinity War and Endgame, in my opinion. It's just one big movie, but yeah, I loved it. Really, if I had to say what one is better between the two, man, that's tough. I'd probably go with Infinity War. Just loved how it made me feel and just drew me in, and how it ended with that cliffhanger, ended with seeming defeat, and pain and destruction. But as I watched it, most people were filled with dread and despair, and I was filled with hope and joy because I saw something. And I'm like, because I'm a Molinist and I understand middle knowledge, I'm like, Doctor Strange has middle knowledge. This is great. I called it a year ago. In fact, I wrote an article a year ago, the same weekend that it came out, that Infinity War came out, and I explained, look, this is my prediction. Everything's going to be all right for the most part, because
Right.
Doctor Strange figured out a way to actualize the best possible future, best possible world, um, to make sure the majority of humanity flourishes and evil is ultimately defeated. The evil of Thanos is ultimately defeated. And I think that that's very similar to what we could say God has done. So, and dude, check this out. Um, Second, I'm having some audio issues.
It's okay.
Okay. Uh, you still got me? Still coming
Yes.
through? Okay. So, Scott Derrickson, the uh, the director of Doctor Strange, uh,
I think I might have lost you. I don't know if you're still talking.
just I am talking. Are you not hearing me?
You're back now.
I'm back. Okay. So yeah, I'll just Scott Derrickson is the director of Doctor Strange, and the guy in charge of um, creating and developing his character. Well, just seeing the Doctor Strange movie alone gets you into a lot of theological and philosophical issues. Uh, Substance dualism. I mean, we talk about the soul and the immaterial aspect of humanity and being able to exist apart from your body and things like that. It does a really good job illustrating substance dualism, that you can exist apart from your body. Uh, and there's some time issues, theories of time. Gets us into A and B theories of time, but really shows an A theory as far as I'm concerned. Anyway, there's things that are like, man, we study this so much when I went to school at Biola. But then you look at Endgame or Infinity War and Endgame, and it's Molinism. I mean, Molinism is what saves the day. Uh, Middle knowledge and Molinism. Uh, and then I found out that Scott Derrickson, I mean, this is all stuff that I've learned at Biola and the theology and philosophy from those professors. I find out that Scott Derrickson majored in philosophy and theology at Biola.
Mm,
Did you know that?
I did not.
And so, man, I'm saying, I think, especially Dr. Craig and J.P. Moreland, you look at, I mean, it's like somebody read their book, a philosophical uh, what's it called?
Philosophical
Philosophical Foundation
foundations for a
for
Christian
a Christian
worldview.
worldview. Yeah, it's like Scott Derrickson and the other people in charge were going through that book, saying, "Oh, this is how we're going to make it work." I mean, it's just mind blowing to me. Uh, I think Craig and Moreland basically saved the entire Marvel universe because
Yeah.
their teachings surely had an influence on the guys that were developing Doctor Strange's character and his powers. And it's Strange who ultimately, yeah, Tony Stark snaps his fingers at the end. But if it were not for Doctor Strange creating a world in which he knew that Tony Stark would freely choose to snap his fingers at the end,
Yeah.
then the universe there's no shot. Thanos wins.
Hmm.
Um, so he also, and I wrote a whole article about this. If anybody is an atheist and they say they're an atheist because of the problem of evil, then I follow that with this. So, oh, did you watch the Avengers? Um, Doctor Strange is sure evil, isn't he? Like, what? No,
For
of
letting
course
all
not.
those
He's
people die.
he's a hero. Doctor Strange is a hero, right? I mean, everybody knows. If it wasn't for Doctor Strange, Thanos wins. Yeah, but Doctor Strange actualized a world in which uh, Tony Stark dies, Black Widow dies. Star Lord.
I lost you at Star Lord. Your screen is frozen. If you can hear me,
The belt. I can hear you.
I lost you at Star
Am I
Lord. I
not
can
coming
hear you
through?
now. You are now. I lost
Oh,
you at
okay.
Star Lord.
That's weird. What's up with that? Yeah, I'll just say, yeah, Star Lord got need took a hard knee below the belt, right? Like
Yeah.
that's gratuitous. Um, there's all kinds of evils that Doctor Strange willingly allowed to happen. He created a world in which he knew these things would happen. Even if they're done by free agents, he still knew that these free agents would freely act this way. Well, should we condemn Doctor Strange, or should we praise him as the hero that he is for actualizing one out of what 14,605
Yeah.
possible
It
worlds that he knew
was
of?
something in the
The
14
only
millions.
yeah, the only world, the only possibility, the only possible future that he was aware of that he could actualize, in which the ultimate amount of humans would flourish, in which the evil of Thanos was eventually destroyed, even if there were other pains and sufferings along the way. That was the best feasible world to create, to actualize. And if one does not have a problem with Doctor Strange, then and one sees that Doctor Strange should be praised as a hero, then why should anything less be said of God? Because I believe God's done the exact same thing with our freedom in mind. So,
So
to answer your question, I love both. I love Endgame primarily for that reason.
yeah. Well, so I agree. I agree with all that. I think the
Okay.
overall story, putting both movies together, is brilliant. I
Yeah.
guess I had more issues with, like, I had more criticisms of it overall in
Hmm.
specific instances. We don't have to get into this. Um,
Well, just
what
really
would
quick, I
yeah.
just really liked them going back to all the other movies too and bringing those back to our minds. With the whole time travel thing, going back to the original Avengers, going back to was it
Well,
Thor?
and they made a way for Loki to come back now. If you notice that.
Didn't.
Yeah,
I,
when they go back to get the
oh,
Tesseract and Tony trips and drops it and Loki picks it up and disappears, and then so they have to go to the other timeline with Tony's father to get it.
okay. I'm tracking with you.
Yeah.
I'll have to think
So
about that one.
I thought that was cool.
I guess Avengers, Marvel or Disney, whoever's in charge, is going to re-release, or the movie's still out in theaters, if I'm
Yeah,
correct.
I think
But
so.
they're now re-releasing it while it's still out in theaters with more scenes.
I heard with that after credit scene.
Yeah, after credit scenes that are supposed to be uh, kind of important. So
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to that. I'll go see it one more time. I've seen it 4 times
I do need
already,
to
I
see
think.
it another time. I need to take my mom to see it because she saw
Yeah,
Infinity Wars and so she hasn't seen Endgame yet, so I want to take her to see it.
yeah.
My
Well,
my
I
own
just have to see it one more time so we can dethrone Avatar from the top grossing movie ever. I think that's the
mm,
most overrated movie of all time.
I have not seen it.
Well, you don't need to see it. Only thing good about it is it gives us an illustration to use to help people understand the incarnation of Christ.
Okay.
Yeah. And I've written
Well,
about that on my
so
website, but
real quick, going back to um, Doctor Strange as a hero.
yeah.
And you were talking about in the context of what you would say to an atheist, complain about the problem of evil. What would you say if the atheist said, "Okay, yes, but despite all Doctor Strange's powers, he still is limited in certain senses, which God isn't. So Doctor Strange could have prevented any suffering, still had a good outcome, if he had all the powers God has."
Oh, no, no, we couldn't. I mean, let's just say one of the worlds in which Doctor Strange could have actualized is a world in which he controls everybody like a robot or a
Yeah.
puppet. And he knows that that's not a good world. In fact, that's more evil than